Hello there, I'm Guildmaster Dan, and welcome to Fourth Wall. Naturally, you might be wondering, hey, where's my Chaotic Neutral episode? Well, I had some technical difficulties, so I have to delay it just a wee bit longer, but I'm going to bring you a Fourth Wall episode, in the interim. So, sit back, relax, and we're going to explore our second Junkbox episode. Church next door is singing. To start us off, I was asked by my wife, who also happens to be a GM, to give my advice on a couple of topics that a lot of GMs don't normally put a lot of thought into, or when they do, they put way too much thought into. As such, I'm going to start us off with travel and give some advice on how you can use it to your benefit. Now, when it comes to travel, the thing to remember is that you don't want to skip it altogether. It can be really tempting to do that, but travel is just like all other downtime, and it is a great time for your player characters to explore what makes their characters, and also for those characters to bond with each other and actually make lasting relationships, to actually simulate the life, to actually role-play out being people in this world. Yet not all players view travel this way. Travel, in fact, can get pretty darn boring if you have yourself some inert players. The type of players that when it comes to downtime, such as being in town or during those travel moments, when they don't know what to do and they just sit there and wait to get there or wait for something to happen. There are two things you can use to flesh out your travel. First is you can use it to do some world building, and second is when your players come across some oddities. Starting with world building, what you need to remember is that when your players are traveling, other people in your world are traveling too, and it's a great opportunity for them to meet people on the road or in space, however you want to do it. And what those people can do is they are great windows into the rest of the world. They're great opportunities for you to introduce hints to future things that are going to happen, or introduce new plot elements, or even just have them talk about the different sorts of news that's going on around the world. Have you heard that the king was poisoned? No? Well, yeah, he was. Apparently, somebody with a gold chalice did it. My hat moved. It's hot, and I have terrible lighting. Further along the road, they can come across military outposts, campsites, travelers' inns. All of those places are great opportunities for role-playing and don't detract from the length of travel at all. Next, if you're just looking to liven it up and you don't want to do any world building, you can definitely do something with your travel. And I'm not just talking randomly generated fights either. You can liven up your travel by having your players come across oddities, things that they wouldn't expect to see on their travels. These can include other adventurers, abandoned places or things, strange or extreme weather, or even just accidents and malfunctions, the latter being on a spaceship. Having them come across difficulties or strange things will give them opportunities to explore and find something neat. Your players can come across things such as an abandoned mansion on the side of the road. That naturally, as they're walking by it, is intriguing for adventurers. Some may want to poke around and see what there is to see. You can have all sorts of fun with this too. You can leave old diaries in there. You could leave signs of struggle. Was this recent? Was it not? Maybe even there's a chest in there or a monster. Doesn't matter. That makes a normal trip between A and B a little more interesting because now you can just have this abandoned place. Even if you don't have any of those subtle details, you just have an abandoned mansion. That leaves your players may explore it anyway. They may, mark that on their map and, just wonder at the story of that along the way. It might just generate conversation, which ideally, that's what travel should be used for the bonding and the exploring of the characters. Now, a lot of game masters like to use random battles during, travel in order to make it interesting. Though on a certain fundamental level this works in enlivening it up, it can be very boring, especially if your combat is slow. Sure, you can use combat like that, but try and avoid it. Try and make travel about the characters. Only use combat if it's necessary. If they were told this is a monster-infested region they have to travel through, or if they're told there are bandits about. Otherwise, try and include some of these other events, such as oddities or meeting people. That way you can build your world and let them explore their characters, so you're doing more than just having another combat there in order to break it up. Now, our next topic is actually something that you can use in conjunction with travel, because one of the challenges that your players can face when they're going between places, especially if you're in a fantasy setting, is the weather that they encounter. Now, on its surface, weather seems like a mundane thing for a game master to worry about. I mean, most people go their entire lives without seeing notable weather, or at least that they really have to worry about it. But for anyone who's ever had to travel cross-country or go on a road trip during a bad storm or a blizzard, or, God forbid, a tornado warning, knows that weather can be kind of treacherous when you're traveling. Further, weather can affect how your players do during their other downtime, such as when they're in town. For example, I was running in a game where there was a blizzard outside. We were in the northern lands, and it was winter, and there was also a blizzard. So it became a serious concern that we could not continue our quest, that we might have to bed down in the town we were in for the winter and wait a few months before we can continue on. Now, players that don't like downtime would be frightened by that concept. But if you're running your world fairly, and there's a blizzard and it's winter and you're in the northern lands, going out into that snow could be a death trap. You need supplies. You need, cold weather gear. You need the things to actually cross that snow. How are you going to make camp at night? Are you going to burn wood for a fire? Are you going to find dry wood in the snow? Are you going to dig out, a large trench every night for you to camp in? Are you going to be able to keep warm with just a single fire? Do you have a wagon? How are you pulling that through the snow? Do you have horses? How are you going to feed them and keep them warm? Let alone, leave that out. If it's like monsoon season where you're at, if you're lower lands, high winds, mud, rain, you can barely see ahead of you, and there's still monsters out that are now even more frightened because of all the crazy weather. Weather can be a serious concern not just when you're traveling, but also when you're in town. It can make, your thieving attempts more difficult. So how do you know when to use extreme weather like that? How do you incorporate weather into your game in a meaningful way that it's not just a backdrop piece? Well, there's a couple ways that you can handle weather. You can either use it for storytelling purposes, where you only include it when you need it, and otherwise you just fall back on climates, generalized weather per region. This is an effective way to handle weather, and, most players don't even think twice about it. It fits fine. They only ever have to worry about extreme weather when it matters. But what we're talking about here is how can you handle your weather in a dynamic way that actually kind of simulates weather and, creates those random situations, those random challenges that your players have to think around. Well, the first thing you might be tempted to do is to come up with tables and charts and this very complex system of how weather is handled, because real-life weather is awfully complex, especially, with scientists, men and women who have dedicated their entire lives to study how the weather works and regularly can get it wrong. My first bit of advice is to avoid complex systems like this, because they're just going to become too much work, too much bookkeeping, it's going to overload you, and you're going to eventually drop it anyway. So avoid things like that. Yes, they can be effective in simulating random weather, but it just ends up being too much work. Now, what I generally use is kind of a mixture of that tried and true climate way of doing it, and using one of these for randomness. This is just a weather die from a dice retailer that I purchased, and you can see it has all different sorts of weather patterns on it. Now, what I'll generally do is I'll pick a climate for a region, so I come up with a general idea of what sort of weather patterns happen in that region. That would be part of my notes for the region when, players go to it. And then what I'll do is every day I'll roll one of these, and if it comes up, let's say it's in a desert region, and I roll sun, that makes sense. That means it's a hot day. Well, then what I do from there is, the next day, I roll again. Let's say that I get rain. Now, that might not necessarily mean that it's going to rain a lot. That means that yesterday was a sunny day. Today clouds are rolling in, and in sparse spots, there might be rain. Well, then I go and I roll the next day. Oh, look, it's rain again. Well, okay. Today, there are more clouds, and the rain's a bit heavier. And let's say I roll again, and it comes to... snowflake. Now, that doesn't mean that those rain clouds are going to start snowing, though you can do that if you want strange weather patterns. But that means, it's a hot desert region, and it started raining. Hasn't really reduced the heat, but all of a sudden, there's a cold front, which starts whipping things up. And now it goes from, gentle hot rain to a raging storm across the desert. Blackened skies, it's lightning, and all throughout the day, it's just miserable weather. We go on to the next day, and let's see, what do we at? Oh, it's sunny again. That doesn't mean the clouds go away. That means they just break up. You see what I'm doing? I'm using the die to show how the weather is affected each day. It's very gradual. Though yes, weather can be very quick and sudden, this is a way to simulate weather moving dynamically, moving randomly, without, just flash doing weather, without it snowing one day in the desert and then having a tornado in the next day. Now, two things I want you to consider when it comes to weather that isn't necessarily advice is that, number one, in fantasy and sci-fi settings, you can break up your normal weather patterns with strange weather, supernatural weather in fantasy or cosmic weather in sci-fi. You can have strange things, fantastical things come out of the weather, such as, say, a wind that carries stray thoughts that, as it brushes by people, it picks up what they were thinking and plants them in people down the line as they brush past them. Just weird things like that. Or even one day it starts raining stones, which can be a big problem if you're on the road. Essentially, have fun with your weather. I have a link to an advice blog for Game Masters, and it talks about supernatural weather and suggestions for that. I'll make sure to include a link below. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up was kind of more on the storytelling side of it / setting building side of it, in that an idea I was pondering about was that you can have weather reflect the balance of good and evil in the world. Essentially, weather patterns become more extreme as there's more evil in the world, meaning it's much easier for tornadoes and terrible thunderstorms and blizzards to happen when more evil is prevalent in the world. But on the flip side, when good is, on the upper level in the world, then you start having more temperate climates. You get more regular rains and more sunny days, more temperate weather. And that's just something you can do that can it'll inform what's going on with the weather, but at the same time, it incorporates into whatever story you're telling and helps create a mood. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is just a little concept that I've always found kind of neat ever since I saw it during the development of Fantasy Flight Games' Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd Edition, and that's the party character sheet. The party character sheet exists to encourage bonding and teamwork amongst your party members. What it contains is a list of all the characters in the official party, any party experience that they've earned, any party abilities that they have or are learning, and any abilities that are being shared amongst the party. Dan, party experience? Party abilities? What are you talking about? Well, essentially the gist is, as the players go throughout the game, as their characters perform acts that show teamwork, cooperation, or even just bonding amongst the party, they earn party experience points, which goes onto their party character sheet. Now, what they can then use these party experience points for is purchasing party abilities and sharing abilities amongst the party. Meaning, one member of the party can take one skill that they know, let's say survival, for example, and teach it to the rest of the members of the party through the party character sheet. The party can choose to use party experience to help teach everybody in the party that survival skill. It's essentially just the mechanic to explain that party member teaching everyone else how to survive in the wilds. Now, the flip side of that is you can use party experience to purchase party abilities, or abilities that your group can use as a whole, meaning maybe they train and they can learn how to form a phalanx in battle with the fighters with shields and such. Or maybe, it's a more subterfuge sort of game, and they learn how to look like a nonchalant group. Essentially, they know how to move as a group while still looking like they're not a group, like they're just random people walking in a crowd. Now, the party character sheet that I just described, it was based on a system where the characters spend their experience points to purchase their advancements. But even in a D20 system where it's based on leveling, the party character sheet can work just the way that I described it. As since the experience that they earn, the party experience, is completely separate from the experience that they earn as players, they can still use it as a group to purchase the things that they want. More importantly, when they get those rewards, now they have to sit down and discuss, okay, how do we want to use this to our best advantage? It has them as players, admittedly doing a little bit of munchkinning as a party, but it's going to encourage teamwork and bonding because it's rewarding them for that. And it's a great way to try and get those disjointed characters or that group of munchkiners to really team together and form a nice unit or family. Now, granted, this wasn't the chaotic neutral episode I told you to expect today, but hopefully the topics that I brought you were thought-provoking and maybe gave you some ideas for your own games. I promise I will have you the chaotic episode soon, but in the meantime, please feel free to comment below if you disagreed with something I had to say, or if you think of something that you'd like to add. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep the conversation going. And as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.